Hello, and welcome to season 4 of our podcast titled Moving the Needle on Wicked Problems. I can't imagine we've done this for 4 seasons.
Yeah,
And I'm really excited to bring you another season filled with interesting and provocative conversations.
absolutely. And welcome back, Senator. I'm excited as well to be starting season 4 with you. We definitely want to build off of some very successful seasons, bring some guests and topics that will not only inform our listeners, but also probably challenge a few ideas, challenge some perspectives, and just, bring some new thoughts and new perspectives to the table.
Precisely. And therefore, we're going to do things a little differently. Uh, we're going to go back in history and explore it a little. And as American historian David McCullough has said, history is who we are and why we are the way we are. And I think we often forget our history in the hurly-burly of today's news, misinformation, disinformation, whatever it may be. And there is no more important modern history of Canada than that of the Second World War. This summer, one of my colleagues, the amazing Senator Tony Loffreda, went back in time and followed the footsteps of the liberation of Sicily by Canadian soldiers, a part of our history that is not acknowledged enough. So let's explore that a little bit with Senator Tony Loffreda. Today, we are speaking to my colleague, Senator Tony Loffreda from Montreal. We all have just come back from a summer break, but I think his summer was more interesting than the summers of most. Um, and before I get to the interesting summer, I want to get my audience to understand a little bit about who you are, Tony. Before you became a senator, you were a banker. Why the transition from banking to legislation?
Well, yes. Good morning, Senator Ahmedvar, and good morning to all viewers. An honor and a privilege being here in your podcast here this morning. Yes, I was executive vice chairman at RBC, and I was a CPA and auditor for 6 years and a banker for over 3 decades. And I wanted to give back. There's a point in life where you say, "I want to give back. I want to contribute." And I believe in the Canadian Senate. I believe in a sober second thought. I believe in sharing our experiences, sharing our knowledge, our know-how. And I find the Senate is the ideal place to do it if we can do it there and share everything we've learned over the course of almost over 3 decades in banking. I think it's a nice way of giving back, and I've always believed in giving back. And as you say, what you do for yourself, I don't remember who quoted that, and I can't coin that, but the saying is what you do for yourself is forgotten and dies with you, but what you do for others is immortal and lasts forever. So I'm glad to give back. I'm glad to bring my expertise to the Senate. I'm glad to be there with privilege to be with such uh, experienced expertise and great colleagues.
Tony, you're really, truly an outstanding senator, but you've also told us that everything began with your family. They landed in Canada from Italy. Uh, in brief, and these stories can never be told in brief because they're so personal. Can you tell me your family story?
Sure. Well, as we all know, Italy was devastated after the war, after the Second World War. Actually, my grandfather died the last days of the war. He was sleeping in the barn and was shot during the last days of the Second World War. And three of his brothers never came back, were never found. Their bodies were never found. And my mom was the second to last she had from a family of 7 children. My grandmother raised the 7 children by herself, and they raised. They they believed in faith. They believed in hard work, in integrity, in honesty, and they struggled but survived. And once she got married, my father and her came. Actually, my father called my grandmother, who was in Canada. My grandmother said, You know, we live in poverty in Italy, but Canada seems to have immense opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity in Canada. You should come here, but do not bring your wife. We'd like to see if we can survive and raise a family first, and then you call your wife. Not only did my dad bring his wife, she was pregnant with me. And I remember my mom telling me the stories, and she said the first time your grandmother saw me pregnant getting off, because they went by ship to New York and then they put them on a plane to fly back to Canada. And she said, when your grandmother saw me pregnant, she couldn't believe it. She says, not only did you bring your wife, you brought her pregnant. How will we survive? And they did. They did by hard work. My father held two jobs. My mother worked all the time also. And my brother is 9 years younger. My sister is 13 years younger. And my dad would finish at 9 o'clock at night. My mom would start at 4 in the afternoon and work till midnight at Red Rose Tea. She would pick me up at school, and I would babysit my brother at 9 years old and sometimes cook for my dad coming home. It's unthinkable today when you think about a child of 9 years old cooking for his dad, babysitting his brother, and those are great memories. But I value my family. I value I'm proud of what they've done, what they have accomplished, along with the community, and glad they chose Canada, such a great country.
I'm always moved by your story, Tony, but I was particularly moved this summer when you decided to take a very long walk through Sicily. Put us in the picture. What was your motivation? What did you what did you experience during those walk, and what do you want Canadians to understand from that experience?
It was a walk for peace and remembrance. Uh, the fragility of our democracies, how fragile they are, how precious peace is. That's the takeaway. Peace is so precious and so fragile. Our freedoms are fragile. And Steve Gregory approached me and he says it's the 80th year anniversary of Los Barco, when the Allied forces liberated Italy. They called them the D-Day Dodgers because D-Day was happening simultaneously. The Allied forces decided to thin out the German forces. Germany had occupied much of Italy, and the Canadian Army, 26,000 Canadian soldiers, helped the Allied forces liberate Italy. 562 left what we have most precious, their lives in Sicily. And we wanted to commemorate those soldiers, not to be forgotten how fragile peace is, how freedom we should all thrive for peace, for freedom, for democracy. And as we walked through the towns, we started at Pachino, where Los Barco happened in 1943. We started at Pachino, and it was a 325-kilometer walk all the way to Adrano in Sicily. And in every town, we commemorated the soldiers that died and left their lives there. Not only our soldiers, not only our Canadian soldiers, but also the Italian soldiers. And we were received in every town. What a warm welcome. The Italians were happy to see us. Many of them remembered what the Canadians did. The Canadians had to be remembered. Many Italians believe it was only the Americans, the Americans, the Americans, the Americans. The Canadians were there. We were there. The Canadian soldiers must be remembered. And I want to add something to that. When we got to Ajira on the last day, the 562 Canadian soldiers, most were buried in that cemetery. And we undertook a project with the Netherlands to contact the families, find the faces of those soldiers that were buried there, and put those faces on the tombstones. And there was a gentleman that was working there for close to 20 years. He started to cry. He said, it is 20 years I'm working here. I never saw their faces of these brave Canadian soldiers that liberated Italy. And it was a touching moment. We did a roll call. We had a person stand in front of every tombstone. And when we called the name, they said present. And to me, that meant a lot, you know.
Yeah, I'm beginning to tear up as well, Tony. It's an
And you saw in
incredibly
the statement, I was a little emotional too. And
yeah.
I never met my grandfather, and I never met his brothers, and so it's sorry, but
No,
it's
it's I'm
I'm surprised. I'm surprised at the statement the other day in the Senate that I kept it all together. I think it was just a moment when I started. It was just a moment where I said, I started to say that we walked, and I start to remember the walk. But the time history must be told, stories must be told, and the fact that these soldiers, not only are Canadian soldiers, but many of the soldiers, Italian, Canadian, all the Allied forces, gave up their lives. We have to thrive for peace. We have to fight us, put all our efforts in to have world peace, because if not, they died in vain. And world peace is so important. It's so precious, and it's so fragile. Our freedoms are so fragile. Our democracies are so fragile. And we don't realize that. We take it for granted. But this is what I wanted to do all summer. And I wanted to add too, at one point, we left Sicily, and the airport in Catania was on fire. We took the airport in Palermo. We went to Rome because when the earthquake occurred, we had collected some funds, and I was president of the Italian Foundation at the time, and the government matched those funds. It was $4 million. And in Rome, in Muccia and Camerino, they constructed, they rebuilt a community center and students' residences. When the Red Cross found out I was in Italy, they said, "We'll inaugurate these facilities." So we flew to Rome to inaugurate the facilities. And then the general called me back. Steve Gregory called me back. He said, "Senator, you've got to get back here. We've got to continue this walk. Your presence is very welcome." And to get back, both Sicilian airports were on fire. And I'm saying this just to really give a kudos to our walkers, to Steve Gregory and his team. It was over 40 degrees, 50 degrees. Both airports in Sicily were on fire. We took the plane from Rome to Calabria, Reggio Calabria. Then we took a boat to Messina, a taxi to Catania. To Catania, we took our car, drove to Taormina, 13 hours to get back because of the fact airports were on fire, roads were blocked, highways were blocked, and we were still walking. The walkers were still walking, commemorating our Canadian soldiers. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Steve Gregory and his team. Steve Gregory was the driving force behind it all. And we had colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors walking with us, retired majors. We had the ambassadors from the UK, from Canada. We had the head of the armed forces from Italy, General Scardino. How can I forget General Scardino? 42 medals, the most decorated general in Italy. And he was there every step of the way with me, with Steve Gregory, every step of the way. And I just have to thank them all. I have to thank the head of the armed forces in Italy, from the Canadian Armed Forces, from the German Armed Forces, from the Italian Armed Forces. Such a great help. Senator Ahmed Var, you don't do this alone. This was really a team effort, and it is Steve Gregory that really is the driving force, that was the motor of this walk for peace and remembrance.
I understand, Senator Loffreda, you always want to make sure that the people behind the scenes also get recognized. Am I right that in all of this, when you were walking 325 kilometers and it was at times 38 to 40 degrees in Sicily, you always had your tie on?
I must say, I didn't walk the full 325 kilometers, although our walkers did. Our walkers did. Steve Gregory didn't. I don't believe Steve Gregory walked the full 320. But the first day we walked, and I'll tell you, just to lighten it up a little bit, we're doing the full walk, myself and my wife, and it's very warm in Sicily. We started at Pachino, where Lo Sbarco truly happened, and we get to the ceremony. And the general is there with his medals, and the ambassadors are all there with their ties and their suits. And here I am, the walker, with my sweatpants and a shirt. And my wife says to me, "Tony, you can't do that. You got to play your role. You've got to respect the general. You've got to respect the ambassadors. You have to look like an official." And so, yes, we were walking. We didn't walk the full 325 kilometers, but when we did walk, always with my tie, my suit on, my uniform on,
and your Senate pin,
and my Senate pin. And although it was I must say it was a personal initiative, all on personal resources. Even my tweets, I did not use Senate staff, or it was all personal, and paid for personally. So not a penny from taxpayer money. I wanted this to be a personal initiative at 100%. Although the Canadian ambassador was there, she kicked it off with me. I contacted her, but it was a personal initiative. But the fact that I had my Senate pin on, I had my uniform on, it added prestige to the event, and it showed the Italian officials, that yes, uh, the Canadian senator truly believes in this mission, is truly passionate about this walk for peace and remembrance. And as I said, with my family history, with the fact every time I heard the Italians talk about the war, they never mentioned the Canadians. The Canadians liberated Italy, just like all the other Allied forces. I wanted that to be clear. We were on Italian TV, on Italian papers, Italian media, and I think it will be clear now. In the cemetery in Agira, almost every Canadian soldier that left their life there, has a photo. And I think we were missing 10 to 20 of them, and we will find and contact their families and find those photos too. And I think that when a 20-year veteran from the cemetery working there starts to cry, it meant so much to me to see that he truly appreciates now. You can see the faces of those Canadian soldiers that gave what we all have most precious, our life, to liberate Italy, for our freedom, and for peace, for world peace.
We're, as you said, Senator, we're 80 years since these events happened. You know, we obviously have Remembrance Day every year to, commemorate the sacrifice of the Second World War, of the First World War. And it's interesting because you've talked about an experience where it's not just a ceremony in Canada, and we lower our heads and we try and remember. You actually experience the walk. You experience where Canadian soldiers, took their steps, lost their lives, sacrificed. How important was that sort of experiential component to really feeling what it was like to live history?
So important and we did it at the time where Los Barco happened in July, where the heat in Italy, in Sicily, is almost unbearable, 40 degrees. And you look at the history and the pictures, and you see some of the soldiers shirtless. And every cemetery in every town that was liberated by our Canadian soldiers, we laid a wreath in the cemetery. We laid a wreath at the tombstone. Some towns now have plaques commemorating our soldiers. Canadian soldiers liberated this town. We have plaques and we have monuments in some of the towns now. We want history to be told. So we felt it. And as a banker sometimes, it was so important to hide our emotions. And when I get emotional, I always ask all the time. I always ask my staff, when I did the statement, was I too emotional? Did I show? But sometimes you've got to let those emotions flow. And we are humans. We are authentic. And although I'm a politician now, but we the emotions always have to be there. And as a banker, it was important. Why? Because you're negotiating. You never want to show your cards. You never want to show your emotions. And, the negotiation tactics always play in, and emotions always kind of diminish what you want to accomplish. But in essence, I could have never hid my emotions, not in banking and not now. Those were important emotions. When we laid those wreaths down, when we named those soldiers that left their lives there, when we and I must say, Steve Gregory and his team, my God, they did such a tremendous job. They retired, and if I mention one name, I'll have to mention so many. But they did such a great job in walking. They walked the full 325 kilometers, where my wife and I did not, I must say, because we were there waiting for them sometimes. We walked the last 2 or 3 kilometers with the General Scardino, with the ambassadors. We would give a speech in every town. We would tell the Italian people, in Rossellini, my father was a Bersaglieri. So was my grandfather and my uncles. And we were greeted by the Bersaglieri in Rossellini. The Army Corps was there to greet us. The whole town was in the piazza. I took the mic and I had to pinch myself. I said, here I am, uh, a little guy like me, addressing such a crowd. Wow, it was a full circle moment for me to address the crowd. And we like to not miss a word and at times be scripted, but I threw away the speech and I said, I'll speak with my heart here. And I think after the speech, there must have been 12 people coming up. Senator, can we take a picture? Can we take a picture? My wife says, but do you know all the people you're taking pictures with? I said, well, I'm a senator now. It's part of the job. Let me take the pictures. And it was so important for the people. I remember one lady coming up to me. She was trembling. Her hands were trembling. And she said, Senator, can I take a picture with you, please? And she gave the phone to somebody else. And just seeing that was just amazing, how the people recognized what we were trying to accomplish. We're trying to commemorate our fallen soldiers, trying to have people remember all the sacrifices that were made by the Canadian Armed Forces back in 1943.
Is there anything that we can do, I mean, better in general when because you've obviously been to Remembrance Day ceremonies over the years, you've done this walk now. Is there anything that the federal government, Canadians, schools, etc., the Legion can do to continue to not only acknowledge the sacrifices, but to actually feel the sacrifices that these soldiers made for our freedom, for the freedom of Italy, for the freedom of Europe as well. What can we do to make sure that we never forget?
I think it's telling history. Stories have to be told. And as we walked through every town, there was always a few individuals. And my wife would tell me, says, we've got to move on now. Some days we did 3 commemorations a day. We've got to move on. Tony, you can't talk to everybody. But some individuals would come up to me, and so many had a story to tell. They showed me pictures, and I took so many pictures, and I did 1 post a day. I could have done 12 posts a day. And people would tell their stories. Here's one story, and some were sad, but some were happy stories. But hope, we have to have hope. Stories of resilience, stories of hope, stories of a better tomorrow. I think stories have to be told. And sometimes it's difficult to tell those stories. Even my dad, when he talks about the war and how our towns were affected. Very seldom do I hear him talk about a story because it hurts. But I remember my mom, until I was 10, 11, 12 years old, she would still cry very often about her dad passing away and how they had to immigrate and how difficult it was. Our first years were very difficult, like every immigrant family in Canada. Were very difficult years, financially. Anyway, I can go on and on with that, but you can all imagine how difficult it was. And I remember my mom till this day. Maybe my brother's 9 years younger, and it was a different era then. We were, but and the stories have to be told. So it's in the schools. The stories have to be told. And I know in Italy, I must say, kudos to Steve Gregory, to the team, to General Scardino from the Italian Armed Forces. Thank you. Grazie mille. The stories worth told. Monuments are there. Plaques are there. They will be remembered. Those stories will be remembered. These stories have to be remembered. And 80 years later, sometimes, we don't tell the stories. We have to tell the stories. And it's all about history. History. A tree has to have roots. And if the roots are not there, nothing grows. And we have to know our history. We have to know how important it is to maintain peace and to have peace with our allies and with the world.
Thank you, Tony. As I reflect on your compassion, you're a real mensch. You're my colleague in the Senate. I always look forward to what you're saying and what you're going to say.
Well, thank you.
But there's another war in Europe right
Likewise.
now. Another war is happening in Europe. I don't know how it is going to unfold. Are you optimistic about the future of Canada?
Rat and I've always said that optimists live longer, happier lives. It's proven. I've always been an optimist in business, in life. I am an optimist. But I am optimistic about Canada's future. I believe, and I think it was President Reagan said that, the Russians also love their children. So Ronald Reagan said that way back when there was a Cold War, and I never forgot those words. The Russians love their children too. And I think we have to communicate, we have to understand each other, and peace has to be what we all have to strive for. We all have to strive for peace. And I know that it's a war. It's a war that's not wanted by anyone. It's an illegal war. I think our freedoms have to be respected, borders have to be respected, and I think we have to come to an end to this war and peacefully. And an end, and may I add that it's important the way we end wars, because the way we end the war determines the next
The
war.
next war.
So, and if we look at history, I always said we have to learn from history how the World War I was ended.
Was not a good end.
It led to World War II. So we have to have the Russians save face here and collaborate, come to a peaceful agreement, and end this war peacefully. But I do agree that it is an illegal war. Our borders must be respected. And I don't understand why Russia undertook such a ruthless and a war. Nobody wins in war, Ratna. Nobody wins in war. But yes, I am optimistic. I believe in Canada. I believe in our future. And I believe that our youth should also believe that they will have a better future. And I believe they will have a better future than we have, and technology and what have you. So let's believe. Let's be optimistic.
That's a great note to end this conversation on. Thank you very much, Senator Loffreda. I have been moved beyond words, and I've learned something that I did not know about you. So thank you to our listeners. And if our listeners have suggestions for topics or guests to host on the podcast, please let us know via Twitter or my Senate email. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ratna.